Oh, I'm told I'm supposed to talk louder today. I try and talk louder for those on Zoom. So hopefully we have a bunch of folks doing it that way. So thank you all for being here. We're going to get going. We're doing our Cougars Care part 5 today on solving complex and improving relationships. And so so glad you guys could be here to join us. Thank you all joining over Zoom. We're glad you're here too, and hope that this content will be informational, hopefully insightful, hopefully something we can use as we navigate our relationships, and we can hopefully apply it to our life and some good healthy practices that come out of it. So this is an interactive time, so we'll kind of just talk as we go through the presentation on some small group times and some large group times, but please feel free to shout out questions or anything as they will come up for you guys. So today, our goals are to talk about the types of healthy relationships that are ones we want to pursue, and what type of qualities might these healthy relationships have. We probably all have ideas in mind, a little bit of what these relationships may look like in our lives, or maybe what we're striving for. Maybe we haven't had many healthy examples and we want to have some of those, want to learn how to engage in healthy ways. We're also going to talk about that healthy relationships have healthy communication. We know that in order to be in a relationship means we have to communicate with one another. And how do we do that in a way that allows us to have healthy practices and assertive communication in that process? And then we're also going to talk about another aspect of relationship, which is conflict. Has anybody had a relationship that doesn't have conflict? And if anybody raises your hand, tell me how you do that. That's amazing. But I think for most of us, relationships involve tension. There's times of wonderful connection, and we all have moments of tension and conflict at times. That is part of being fallen beings with fallen emotions and fallen relationships. We're not perfect. So we struggle. And so we're going to talk about ways to have compromise, how to connect well and communicate well with one another in our time. Some logistic housekeeping pieces. How many here are for SONA credit? Anybody here for the psychology department SONA credit? A couple people. Okay, research credit. Good, good. Well, I'm glad you're here, and those of you who are here for other reasons as well, which is wonderful. We'll take attendance by completing the survey at the end of our session. That will help you also get your SONA credits, and hopefully you've also registered through our SONA system, so we did both of those. And then if you have any questions, Dr. Nathaniel Fernandez is our clinician who oversees Cougars Care, so his email is here if anybody needs help or questions afterwards. So want to put that up there. And as we get going with every Cougars Care, we talk about ground rules of ways to have healthy, productive discussion in our time today. We value respect, that everyone has different opinions, and we are respectful of those. If privacy is an important piece, if we share something that's very meaningful or personal, that we keep that private in our time together. If you ever need to take a break, to step out, if the material is a lot to hold at some time, you're welcome to do that. Please have some self-care. And there's no dumb questions, ask questions anytime. We're here to help. So, and parts of our lecture will be recorded too, just so folks. And hi, Joe. So we want to talk a little bit about just foundations found in scripture about what relationships look like. And I think it's so important with all that we do to recognize where our faith is a part of those pieces. And so we talked about what communication, what healthy relationships look like, even from a biblical perspective. And so Genesis talks about, then the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. And in Colossians, we read, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also forgive. And above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. So as we look at these two scriptures, what kind of things stand out to you as far as maybe values about relationships found in scripture? Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's great languaging. It's a necessary force to survive. Yeah, we were made for connection, right? We're made for connection with God, made for connection with one another. That's a great way of languaging. Yeah. What else stand out? What characteristics, maybe, or qualities stand out to you? Yeah. That's a great insight. Patience is so helpful, especially when we're talking about conflict, because it's hard to be able to pause and pay attention to what other people are saying when we're activated. But that's actually a wonderful skill we can practice and do better over time with as we are intentional about that. I love that other things are highlighted in this verse too, as far as having humility and compassion and kindness. Even forgiveness is highlighted too. And the idea that often the scripture talks about forgiveness, but doesn't always have that call for reconciliation. And I think when we talk about people who have hurt us, that's a good thing to also recognize. As we've gone through difficult times, God calls us to forgive, but not always to reconcile with someone who has hurt us or may continue to do so. And so I like to separate those two, because sometimes we mesh those together, that forgiveness equals reconciliation. And I think that's not necessarily the case or the right way to interpret some of those things. So, but certainly there is so much value in letting go of somebody hurting us. Not that we forget the impact, but that we don't have to hold it so tightly so it doesn't burden us down in the same way. There's goodness in that. So let's talk a little bit about healthy relationships and what this might look like for each of you guys. In our group, in maybe small groups around you, maybe 2 or 3 people around you, talk about some of the most healthy relationships that you have experienced. So maybe that's a friendship, a romantic relationship, family relationships, and especially what has made that relationship healthy for you? What kind of qualities have stood out, or what are the characteristics of that relationship? We talk really openly, or I have really good boundaries with this close friend of mine, or they're very available, or I feel like I can be vulnerable, I can be myself. What types of things have made those relationships healthy? So we'll take the next 3 minutes or so, kind of talk in small groups and talk about what you noticed. All right. So as you guys were sharing in groups, were there any themes that stood out to you as far as what makes these relationships healthy? What were some of the things, and maybe folks on Zoom too that might have noticed, but any things that stood out to you or things that made you realize these are healthy, these are good relationships? Yeah. Like having somebody willing to listen is huge. Yeah. Somebody who wants to work through hard times, who wants to be able to talk through things. Yeah, that's great. What else? Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I think it's huge to be able to, I love that example of when somebody asks us, how are you doing? And we can actually answer honestly. I think there's so much goodness in it. Our culture has kind of conditioned us to keep people at a distance. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. We kind of just get on our day. But that really doesn't allow us to be known in those moments. It doesn't allow us to be seen or to feel valued. And while it's a vulnerable response, say, I'm okay, but actually that last class was really rough, or, you know, my roommate's driving me crazy, or actually I'm just having a really down day. Those are harder responses, but allow us to be seen and heard and valued. And having friends who can hold those responses when we ask how your day's going and respond with that real response is such a wonderful quality in a relationship. So thanks for sharing. That's a really great example. Yeah. Any other ones come to mind? Or maybe in the chat?
Someone on Zoom said communication and not expecting something from one another.
Oh, I love that. Communication and not expecting something from one another. I think we often talk about the idea, especially even in dating relationships, I need someone to complete me and I expect something from another person, that they're going to meet all these needs. I have my top 10 list and they're going to fill all these criteria and complete me and help me feel valued and whole. And especially in dating relationships, I talk about we often need somebody to complement us, but not complete us. And there's a difference there, right? We want someone to bring strengths that maybe we don't have, and we can bring strengths that they don't have, and have a good connection together that complement one another, but don't complete one another, and have a demand or an expectation on somebody to fulfill our needs all the time, because that's not a realistic expectation for most people, right? So that's a great observation. Thanks, Ray. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the relationship spectrum. And I'm going to pass around a handout to everybody. And this talks about, this goes a little more in depth than what's on the screen here. And this shares a little bit about that relationships have different qualities and characteristics, and those can be help us define where they fall as far as healthy to unhealthy on a relationship spectrum. So a healthy relationship is one that has the characteristics in this first column. A healthy relationship, as we may know, is one that is respectful, where there's trust, where somebody said there's open communication to one another. There's honesty and equal balance as well. We feel like this person helps complement us, right? Maybe not complete us, but complement us and help have a mutual and equal responsibility to the relationship, and it's balanced. We find as we go further down the spectrum that sometimes these qualities and characteristics can get tainted, and we see that that may lead us to find we're in maybe an unhealthy relationship in some way. And we may find that relationships are not so black and white. There's qualities that are really good, and we may struggle in some areas, and that's okay, but these are helpful for us to notice where might we want to address some of these themes in our relationship. Is that something I need to address in my own life? Is it something I want to communicate that's not working well with a friend, with a coworker, with a parent, with a spouse, whoever it may be, and recognize we want to address that. So unhealthy characteristics certainly are relationships where there is disrespect, right? Where we're not honoring the other person, we're not being respectful, where communication isn't active. Maybe it's something, maybe there's passive communication. We'll talk about that later. Maybe we're not communicating in a way that's kind. Maybe it's aggressive communication. Certainly where trust isn't a foundation, we can see that there are challenges to having a healthy relationship when there's not a foundation of trust, when there's not honesty, or if we're feeling unbalanced. Maybe I am always pulling this one friend along and holding the weight and the burden of this relationship, but I also don't ever feel that's given back to me in any way, or I don't feel like they're pouring into me as much as I pour into them, or I don't feel as cared for in that relationship perhaps. And there are times for that where we do carry those burdens more than others, and that's okay, but to also recognize we need people who also pour into us as we pour into others too. And ideally there's a good give and take in those relationships. And then an abusive relationship, one that is a little further down the spectrum, where it's certainly one we want to make sure we address. And you can see these as red. This is kind of like, stop, pay attention to this relationship, address those concerns, move away from that relationship if you need to protect yourself. Certainly an abusive relationship is where there's mistreatment. Maybe there's harmful communication. Certainly if there's verbal abuse or things, you want to make sure you can protect yourself and step away from those harmful relationships. If there's accusing rather than trusting, gaslighting, or where you feel controlled or overly isolated. I know that you don't have to go through those relationships alone. I'm in the handout talks about other areas of that as well, but to recognize that even the counseling center here is to support you, and there's other avenues, even pastoral care on campus. Even just talking to a safe friend about a relationship that's not going well can be a healthy way of recognizing I need an outside perspective, or how do I start to change some of these things, or how do I get myself to a place of safety? And certainly clinicians are here to support those conversations too. But hopefully there were many qualities in the healthy relationship area that resonated with you. And you can recognize these are things in my friendships, in my family relationships that I'm doing well, or other people are doing well, things that we want to perpetuate or continue. So I want to pause there for a minute just to see if we have questions, because there's a lot of engaging content. I don't know if anybody on Zoom has thoughts too, but want to check in if anybody has questions or thoughts or reflections if they see that slide. Feels okay? Okay. All right. So we'll go on to the next one. We're going to talk about what do we do when we recognize we're in these different gradients of a relationship, a healthy relationship, unhealthy relationship, maybe even an abusive relationship. How do we address these things? And how do we have healthy communication in the midst of it? And so we want to talk through these 4 different areas of communication. We can have passive communication, maybe where we're not assertive, but we recognize we want something out of this relationship, or we need to communicate it, but we're not sure how. So maybe I hold on to that. I don't explain myself very well, or it may come out in other ways. The opposite of that is instead of holding back too much, then we put out too much and we have aggressive communication. I've just been holding it in so long, and then it just explodes and it comes out in aggressive communication. We know that's not necessarily the best option for us either. Passive aggressive communication is kind of this cycle where we hold something in so long, where our boundaries or our self-respect is maybe being challenged in some way, so I feel taken advantage of, and I get upset over time, kind of like a volcano building pressure, and then it comes out, and maybe in an aggressive way because the pressure's been building for a while. Or assertive communication, which is really what we're shooting for, where we are recognizing our own needs and we're communicating them in a healthy way, in a way that's not aggressive and not passive, where we avoid or ignore our own emotional experience, but in a way that says, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'd like to communicate, this is what I might need. And we'll talk through some good tools on how to do that. So some of the differences between passive communication and aggressive communication. Passive communication, you may have friends or family members in mind as we're talking about this, so you don't need to shout them out, but you can certainly know what this might look like in your own life. Somebody who has a passive communication style is someone who may give up their rights and maybe defer to the rights of another person. So in a conversation, where do you want to go for dinner? Oh, I don't know, anywhere you want to go. When inside, they really recognize, like, I'm craving Chick-fil-A, but I just don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to assert myself, or it feels scary to do so. And sometimes we've learned that behavior over time, that that's protective, but it also may diminish our own value or a sense of worth in that process too. So the pros of having that type of passive communication, deferring to another person, it keeps peace in the relationship. There's lots of harmony. It's easy to make friends, maybe. The cons is that maybe what you really want or what you're really hoping for may go unmet. I come from a family that very much is very passive. We avoid conflict at all costs, which is nice on the surface. We have a very nice, calm family. Underneath the surface, there's certainly things where we get really irritated and it goes unaddressed, or maybe we never feel fully heard because we're not able to really articulate what's going on for us. And so some of our needs may go unmet because of that. Aggressive is the other way, and this is somebody who has a communication style where they stand up for their own rights, but without the regard to other people. So they're so aggressive in a conversation, it can come across as a way that is harmful, in a way that can actually be isolating. It can put distance between you and another person because your language is painful for the other person, and maybe it's even verbal abuse in ways that could lead to legal issues or conflict. And certainly it's hard to maintain friendships with an aggressive communication style, even if it's not just yelling all the time, but just being so assertive to the way that we dominate those around us. And that's not somebody we enjoy being around either, right? The pros is they win, but the cons is there's lots of sadness and loss in the midst of that too, and to the detriment of that relationship. So we may find that we fall into this passive aggressive style, where maybe we kind of recognize we don't want to come out in anger, but it may come out that way after all. And we want our needs to be met, but we don't quite know how to assert it in a healthy way. So passive communication style is a style in which individuals have a pattern of avoiding their opinions or their emotions or their feelings because they want to protect those around them, right? In the dinner example, I just want to take care of the person I'm with. Let's go to wherever you want to go to meet the other person's needs, but you sacrifice your own in the process. And then so far, for some people, it turns into resentment. Well, they never really asked me again where I wanted to eat. In fact, every Friday we go out to eat together, and we always defer to what they want. And then that volcano, that pressure starts to build, that frustration, to the point of no one's taking care of me in this conversation or in this relationship. No one's paying attention to what I really want. And then it explodes into the aggressive response, right? So this passive aggressive communication are typically they're indirect attempts to control or even punish others, right? So I may be really mad. So the next time I go out to eat, I'm not even gonna talk to that friend. I'm gonna take a different friend just to get back at them. But it's very passive, right? I didn't actually communicate that I was just sad because you didn't ask where I wanted to eat again, and I missed my opportunity to assert myself. People normally use this type of communication as an outlet from resorting to being aggressive, right? So instead of seeing that friend on Cougar Walk and going to dinner with them and saying, how come you never ask me where I want to go? Or how come you never let me make a decision? You just choose to go with somebody else and ignore them. And that's kind of passive of telling them I'm mad at you without really telling them you're mad at them, right? So we may all have personal examples of what this looks like, and I see some heads nodding. We may be a part of that cycle sometimes. Other people may be a part of that cycle. And that's good for us to start to recognize how this impacts our relationships and what those themes are. So in small groups, again, we'll take just a couple minutes, and those on Zoom too, feel free to chat and share as you're comfortable. In what situations do you find yourself experiencing that passive aggressive cycle? You notice that volcano building, and so to avoid the explosion, maybe it comes out in another way, but in a way that still doesn't articulate what you really want to. And have you found yourself ever using passive aggressive communication, and how did that work out for you? We've all been there, right? So that's okay. There's no harm in saying, yes, I do that. In fact, I will own that I do that a lot. I get frustrated. And then, well, I'll just take out the trash myself when my husband doesn't take it out. You know, those kind of things. And we all do that, right? So, but it doesn't work out in the long run. Then I'm irritated that the trash is building. He's still not taking it out. So I do it. And then I just feel like I'm angry at him for the rest of the night, but I never talk about it and say, how about you take the trash out, right? So let's pause in your small groups. We'll take another minute or two and talk about some of those questions, and we'll come back. So tell me a little bit about what you guys came up with in your group. Is anybody willing to share an example maybe of something you talked about, or some themes that you may have noticed? I love this one. Yeah. Well, that's a great example of using active communication and actually talking to your roommate when you're having a conflict or when they're leaving a dirty thing because they're driving you crazy. And also recognizing good boundaries. If I can't control the other person's response, I think for us sometimes in relationships, that's a really hard thing. I can communicate something and hope for a certain outcome, but there's no guarantee they can respond in the way that I want them to. And that's tricky. But I love that you didn't resort to passive aggressive behavior. You know, it's not like you knew she was coming into the bathroom after you, so you intentionally made it all messy for her, or did other things to show her you were angry. But you actually approached it and shared that concern. That's a good example. Yeah. That's a great example. I imagine in that moment, it felt really good to open that door. I'm doing this so you touch my dress, like this is not okay. And I'm also going to be nice and close it. But for a minute, it felt good to recognize I had a need that went unmet, and you wanted him to see that. Yeah, that's a great example. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, yeah, good. Other thoughts or comments, or even from the chat? Yeah. It is important to know where those lines of gray are, right? Where is it that we are being kind in a relationship with? Joe values kindness, which is a wonderful thing, to want to be kind to those around us. But where does our kindness go so far to the fact that maybe we sacrifice ourselves in the process of, oh, I don't feel like I'm actually being seen or heard or valued in my kindness? Or is there a way to be kind in a relationship and maintain peace, but also still feel cared for, you know, and seen and valued and have an equal balance in that relationship? That kindness is important, yes, but how do I also recognize I want to be kind and take care of myself in that process too? And I love that you're making that distinction a little bit of how that, what that looks like when it plays out. Yeah. Any other thoughts? That's a good question. I think sometimes if you may find someone is maybe angry with you in a way that you didn't realize or not know why they're angry. You know, so for example, in the trash taking out scenario where I'm with my husband and the trash is overflowing and I kind of grumpily take it and march out and throw it away and come back and I'm just in a bad mood for the rest of the night and I, you know, don't wash his dishes and just leave them on the table. I'm passively showing him that I'm angry with him. So he may recognize, oh, something's wrong with Lori, something happened, but he doesn't know why because I've never communicated that, but I'm passively communicating my anger. So it may be those situations or relationships where somebody's having a response to me and I don't quite know why. I don't know what I missed. And it's not always that person's fault because they didn't communicate with us, right? So it's not my husband's fault that I'm angry with him. It's actually my own fault because I didn't take responsibility for my own emotions and actually tell him I was mad for not taking out the trash. So those are good things too in any relationship when we notice tension to actively address it rather than allowing it to go by. It would be great in those moments if my husband would be able to say, Lori, I think you're upset. What's going on? And open that door for a conversation. That would be a really healthy response, right? Or for us in the opposite seat too of, hey friend, I know you've been really not responding to my text lately, or you're avoiding me, or what's going on? And then we can start to address the concern that may be underneath the surface that the person's passively trying to communicate. So that's a really good question. Yeah. Any? I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I think that's a great idea to be able to vocalize what you're noticing and to ask what's going on in that relationship. I think that's a really healthy thing. Yeah. I like that you use the language I noticed. We'll talk about I statements, I think even maybe in one of the next slides, but being able to, instead of blaming the other person, you're being mean, you're being angry, but saying, I'm feeling something going on in this relationship. I'm noticing you're not responding the way you typically do. I'm wondering if something is going on here. And that helps take the blame away from the other person while still addressing what's going on. So that's a great way of addressing that concern. Yeah. Good thoughts, guys. So when we think about assertive communication, this is what we're actually shooting for, right? So that we can avoid the passive aggressive cycle. And this is where we can focus on standing up for our own rights without infringing or disrespecting other people in the process or their rights as well. So you want to be able to share your thoughts, your feelings, your needs in the moment, which takes some self-awareness to recognize what am I feeling in the moment, what am I thinking in the moment, with the other person's feelings and needs in mind as well, and honoring where they are in that process, in that conversation too. And we want to make requests, but not demands. So in the case of going out to dinner with a friend, hey, next week, can I choose where we go to dinner? Because Chick-fil-A, I've just still been craving and I really want to go out to dinner at Chick-fil-A. Not a demand of, hey, we have to go to Chick-fil-A next week. Like, it's my turn to choose, you know, and there's a request versus a demand. And that has a different way of impacting people. So we want to be able to be assertive, recognizing what we want and what others want, and to find a way to do that together. I see that that's an important piece for you. You pick today, I'll pick next time. Let's figure it out together, right? Honoring another person and ourselves in that process. So we're going to talk about types of assertion. So I think we have that handout for everybody in front of you. And this talks about different types of assertion. We're going to talk through these really quickly and then take a couple minutes for you on your own, not in groups, but just to kind of circle and look through which types of interpersonal effective statements, we'll do that one in a minute too, what types of statements you want to remind yourself of as we go through this week. But when we look at types of assertions, we have our basic assertion. And this is a simple expression where we just stand up for what we need. So an example might be, excuse me, I'd like to finish what I'm saying. It's very simple, straightforward, basic, but I'm articulating what I need, so I'm not being taken advantage of. We can also assert ourselves using empathy or emotion, where we recognize another person's situation or even their feelings, as we also recognize our own experiences too. So for example, I know you're feeling angry and frustrated while you're waiting for a response, but the best thing I can do is give you a ballpark estimate for how long it will take. We're acknowledging the other person in that moment. We're empathizing with them. I know this is hard. And still saying, this is my boundary, this is what I can offer. I can't give you everything, but this is what I can do. Escalating an assertion was where we start with kind of a minimal assertive response, something small, but then if the other person doesn't respond in the way we want them to, we gradually escalate and become more firm in what we're communicating, but not being aggressive. So in a way of just confidently stating what we might need. So for example, I know what you have to say is important, but I really want to finish what I'm saying. And I'm just coming a little bit stronger and communicating that with assertion or with confidence. I really want to finish before you speak. Let me just take a moment right here. I'm just going to finish what I'm saying. And then let's hear what you have to say as well. We can also use confrontive assertion. And that's where we kind of describe what needs to be done or what actually happened. And we're confident in expressing what we want. So a little bit more confrontation in there, but in a direct way. For example, I told you to complete the forms by November 15th. You agreed to do so. We're kind of just stating the facts, right? What actually occurred. And now it's January 15th, and you're telling me that you forgot the forms, but you still expect to complete our business on time. What is it that you want me to do? So recognizing I'm putting my boundary in place, but I'm saying it a little bit more with some confrontation, but in a way that still invites collaboration as we navigate what's going on. And then some of the tools we talked about are using I language, and you'll see that here. When somebody is responding to us, they may say, when you did this, it really hurt my feelings. And we can talk about how it affects us. It affects me this way. We can describe our feelings. I feel this. And then describe your desire. Therefore, I would like. We can do this in a way that actually communicates healthy behavior and healthy communication. So for example, When you leave the sink all wet and messy in the bathroom, it affects my level of comfort in my own home. And I feel like you're not respecting me as a person in that process. Therefore, I'd like to talk about a way we keep the bathroom clean together, right? That's a great, I love that you shared that. Thank you for letting me use that. That's a great example, though, of using I statements to communicate what we need. And we're not blaming the other person. We're just stating what happened and also stating what we need. Another example they say is when you shout, the effect is I'm unable to work with you and I feel angry. Therefore, I would like you to stop shouting and just tell me what you want. It's a very good rational conclusion, good rational way to communicate. And then we have a positive assertion, and this is expressing positive feelings about yourself or someone else. I'm glad you came back to see me. I did a good job working with that upset student. Of recognizing that there are positive things we can appreciate and communicate and assert in a relationship too. We can repeat an assertion. We call that the broken record sometimes. Saying things over again to make sure that they sink in. For an example, you said you would complete this form and there's still missing information. Maybe they reply sarcastically. The form has not been completed. They have another sarcastic remark. I have to have this form completed. I think of like a teacher responding to like an elementary school kid. I'm not going to do it, Miss Lacey. Well, I still need it. You're going to have it. You're not going to fail your course. I'm not going to do it. Okay, well, if you don't do it, you're going to receive an F. Okay, I'll do it. You know, communicate. I'm channeling my 10-year-old kid as we're talking. But recognizing that we can repeat what we need in that value of assertion, and that can be important too. And then lastly, is fogging assertion. And this is acknowledging the possibility of truth that the other person could be saying something that's important and agreeing with them, maybe in concept in the big picture, but maybe not necessarily in the small details or in the facts of what they're sharing. So for example, I know these rules may appear to make no sense, but they are the procedures I must use. So even though the big picture is a little bit what we agree on, I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, I agree with you, but factually, these are still things I have to do. You know, I know in principle, we're supposed to keep the apartment clean, and in practice, this as well, I want this to work out. And so it's a way to join with another person when we're communicating with them too. Any thoughts or questions as you think about these types of assertions? Can you see yourself using them at a certain time? Any examples come to mind? Yeah, I like that you ended in a softer note because it shows that your communication was effective too. And I like that you were thoughtful of honoring another person's emotion in the process. You were using some of that empathic communication a little bit. I can hear this is hard to understand where I'm coming from, you know, and then use some self-assertion and I statements. I think this, or I feel this. And that's a great way to navigate tension or conflict, even though it may not fully resolve everything, but it's a good step in the right direction. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay, so the activity we're going to do next is just to take a couple minutes with the handout I just shared with you. Does anybody else need one? We're going to talk about cheerleading statements for interpersonal effectiveness. Sometimes I like to talk about, we have this harsh inner critic sometimes in the back of our mind, or this critical voice that says, for some of us, like, don't say that, or it's not worth sharing your opinion right now, or don't rock the boat, or your thoughts aren't valid, or they're not worthy of being shared. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves that it's okay to share what's important to us. It's okay to communicate what we need or what we value. And so this handout gives you some suggestions, and you can even write your own at the bottom too, of maybe a mantra or a narrative you might want to try or practice this week to remind yourself to assert yourself a little bit more in communication, or my thoughts have value and meaning. And so we'll take a couple minutes to read over these and circle one or two that stand out to you, and see if it's something you could practice this week and think about how you might practice that. Okay, so as you were kind of looking over those options, were there any that stood out to you, or one that maybe you circled or highlighted that you want to try, maybe with friends or in your relationship this week? Good example. Good example. Just because someone doesn't respond in the way we want them to, doesn't mean we shouldn't articulate what we need, right? That's a great example. Yeah. What else? Yeah, Jeff. I love that one because that's a healthy boundary, right? Sometimes we have the expectation that we have to say yes to everything. And that we're only a good friend if we say yes all the time, or a good daughter, or a good girlfriend, or boyfriend, or roommate, that we always say yes. Can you give me a ride every time? Yes. Can I cheat off your homework? Yes. Can I, will you always do these things together? Yes. But what happens over time if we're always saying yes to maybe things that we don't agree with or that we don't want to do? What does that do for us? We feel taken advantage of probably over time, right? You feel unseen or unvalued. It can have a negative consequence for that friendship over time. So Joe, I love that you're highlighting what will be our best yes and our best no for that relationship. And that's having healthy boundaries too. When I say yes to someone over and over again without feeling any reciprocity in that or return, that's going to be exhausting over time. And it's actually good for the relationship to say no too. You can also, get that support in another place, or you can also wait and I'll give you a ride when I'm able to, but I can't right now, and that's okay. It takes care of me as well as the other person. It's a good one to highlight. Yeah. Any other ones stand out to you guys? Oh, I love that. Great example. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I have the right to assert myself even though it may inconvenience others. So I am still valued in that process of, I still want to go to the gym, even though you still want to stay home and not go, and you want to spend time with me. I still want to go to the gym. I'm going to go for it, and we'll find a way to do both. That's a great example. It's okay to also recognize when it's good for me to take care of me. And then there's also some theory that talks about it's also okay to yield to somebody for the betterment of the relationship too. Of when do I also need to compromise with somebody too? Okay, I also want to have a good, healthy relationship, so I know we need quality time. How do we do both? How do we have time to hang out, go to the gym and come back and then have dinner together? Or how do we meld both of those things for the betterment of the relationship? Or the friend who always wants the ride, how do I find a way to take care of them while also protecting myself and yield for the betterment of the relationship and find a compromise that works for both people? Yeah, thanks for sharing. Good example. Any from the chat? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about when there is conflict, how do we address it, and how do we mediate it? So we're going to talk about, again, a foundation in scripture. Matthew 18:15 says, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. There is a value of reconciliation found in this scripture, right? It's not just if there's a conflict, write them off right away. No, try again. Talk one-on-one. Talk with friends. Bring a group of people. Talk to the family. Be with your community, talk about it, get support as you go through it before we just succumb to the conflict and the relationship not working out. There is goodness in reconciliation, right? And having resolved a relationship. And then Matthew 7 talks about, for with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but you do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. And so this verse is also highlighting we need to have some self-awareness. When we have conflict in a relationship, instead of just blaming the other person, saying you're doing all these things wrong, or how come you're missing this, or this is what you need to fix, we also need to pause and check in, what's going on with us in the moment? Maybe I have the exact same concern. And I actually, like I did a Bible study on this one time, they talk about the log. A log is made of wood, right? And in scripture, when you take down the idea of what a speck is, it's actually, in the native language, it's a speck of sawdust, which is the same type of matter as the log, right? So we actually have the exact same concern as the people we're mad about. You have a log, I have a speck of sawdust, but either way, it impairs us from doing good together. And even though, and you may find this in relationships, the people that really bother you the most resemble the things that you have going on in your own life too, right? So if I'm really angry, for example, at my husband not cleaning up the kitchen, but I have that exact same concern because I don't clean up the bathroom. That's my spec. And he, might have a log, but it's really cleanliness is the exact same component. Sawdust to a log, it's still wood, right? So it's interesting for us to recognize what we often get most irritated about is sometimes reflective of our own experience as well. So food for thought. So if we go on to the next slide, we're going to talk about how do we address these conflicts without ruining a relationship? How do we do it in a way that's minimally invasive? So we use the example even from a medical profession where a minimally invasive surgery is the technique that limits the size of an incision. So the smaller, the better, right? They have those wonderful Da Vinci devices that microscopically go in and do a surgery and come out and they leave the tiniest little hole for this big process. But it allows for quick healing time. It's not so invasive that it tears everything apart. And so just the same in relationships, we want to have an approach that really gets to the heart or the core of what's going on without making a big mess in the process, without having a big recovery, without having a lot of trauma. And so we want to be able to be assertive, and really assertive communication is the remedy in a lot of these ways. Passive aggressiveness perpetuates the problem. If we're aggressive in our communication, it blows it up. It's bigger than it needs to be. But if we can just be assertive from the get-go, that's a really effective strategy for addressing the problem, but without making too much of a mess in the process. And so self-reflection, back to that Bible verse, is really critical of recognizing, I want to communicate something. How do I do it directly? And how do I pay attention to what's going on with me so I know exactly what I want to communicate? So I encourage you guys to ask these questions. What am I really upset about? So as you think about a relationship that bothers you, what bothers me the most? Are my expectations fair? Is it fair for me to expect my roommate to clean up after herself in the bathroom? Probably. That sounds valid to me, right? Is it a realistic expectation that, they mop the floor every day and they, Clorox the sink and everything, every day? Maybe that's too far. But it can have a realistic expectation that at least it's tidy. And then when in doubt, take a time out. So when I recognize I am being activated or I am overwhelmed or I'm not in a good place to communicate, to pause and step aside. Maybe go into the other room and close the door and just sit for a minute and breathe. Take a moment to journal about this relationship or this friendship and what's going on. I need to pause. Take some quiet time to pray and ask God, what's going on in this relationship? It's not working. What am I missing? What's going on with me? What's going on with them? What do I need to pay attention to? And that will help us to approach it in a really healthy way moving forward. All right. So lastly, we're going to talk about conflict mediation and resolution within positions and interests. And these are two different things that I think are just important for us to highlight. And I'm also going to pass out this handout that is checklist for a good resolution. So this will also help us come to a good resolution or resolving a conflict in a relationship. And so we're going to highlight that positions are different than interests. Positions are surface statements of where a person or an organization stands, and they rarely provide insight into really what's going underneath, motivations or values of what's really going on. I have this position, I want to go to Chick-fil-A, but interest is really what's going on underneath. My interest is I really want to feel valued in this friendship. I really want you to honor how I'm feeling or my experience or what I want, right? What's really motivating me in this conflict is that I really want to be seen and heard. And it's easier to find resolutions that meet people's interests than those that line up with their position. Sure, you want to go to Chick-fil-A, fine, but you're not really honoring, no, I just want to be seen and heard. I don't really care where we go to eat, truly. I just want you to value my opinion, and I feel misvalued. And this is because people's interests are often more compatible than they assume. Well, actually, the friend I'm talking with about dinner, they want to be seen and heard too. So how do we really honor what the other person wants? Even when on the surface we may Chick-fil-A and McDonald's, they might be different. Underneath the surface, we really just want to hear each other well and have a healthy communication and a healthy friendship. So this checklist for a good resolution is there, and it helps us bring in some insight a little bit about the relationship or the conflict. And we want to have resolutions that have some of these details. Is the resolution specific enough? Does it tell us who, what, when, where, how I feel heard, how I feel seen, maybe what the conflict will resolve with the, oh yeah, we're going to go to Chick-fil-A today and McDonald's tomorrow, and I really value your input as we talk about where to eat. Is the resolution balanced? Do both people solve the problem? Do they speak into that process together? Can both students really do what they promise? Can they both agree to honor what the resolution is? Is that doable? And will it solve the problem? Does it solve the position, fit the problem on the service where to eat? Or does it also solve the interest? I really want to be seen and heard and valued in this relationship. And sometimes it's okay to solve it just for today too. It doesn't have to be ongoing and have a perfect solution, and it may change over time. So I wanted to highlight those for you guys as well. All right, and as we wrap up, a couple other thoughts for us. Things that will help us have a good resolution are highlighted up here. Set a time to talk, and preferably in person. We know when we send text messages or try to navigate a conflict over text, you can't read tone. Somebody puts too many exclamation points. I don't know if they're happy or angry. Sometimes it's hard to tell. We want to be assertive and not aggressive. We want to share what we need, what we feel, what's going on, but without hurting the other people or devaluing them in the process. Work to identify both sides of interest, what's underneath the surface, not just the position, not just the topic of the conflict. And make sure the agreement is reached that is realistic and specific, that you have a good conclusion. How do we spend quality time, and how do we take care of each other with what we want to do in the process too? How do we keep the apartment clean and respect each other's privacy and values and what we need to feel safe in our home, those kinds of things. When needed, seek support from a third party, someone who's neutral, who may have an outside lens. Sometimes going to mom can be helpful, or another friend or roommate, or somebody who knows both of you in the conflict but can have an outside perspective. Certainly a counselor can be helpful in those moments too. And then follow up again to make sure the resolution is working for both parties. And that's an important thing too, to check in. We talked about this, how is it working? And follow up with that relationship. Okay, any questions about that so far? Good, okay. Well, I want to thank you guys for being here today. We kind of scooted through a lot of good content, and I love the examples that you guys shared, and I think they are so relevant. I want to remind you that the Counseling Center is here for any sort of relationship needs, whether it's conflict or how to navigate a healthy relationship, roommate, a romantic dating relationship, family relationship, ways of just doing life well. We're here to happy to help. You can follow us on Instagram or check us out on the website too. And our phone number is for 24/7 crisis here too. If you ever need to just talk with somebody, middle of the night, 2 in the morning, the weekend, we're here for you.